Welcome back, artists. We are going to finish up our Mother's Day lily flower by adding color. So we're going to have a few different options depending on what supplies you have available to you. The first thing you're going to need, of course, is the drawing that we did from the last video that should be Sharpied already and the pencil behind the Sharpie already erased. And then in terms of adding color, my preference for this project is colored pencils. If you don't have colored pencils, you can do the same lesson using crayons. You could also use a combination of crayons and colored pencils, which I'll talk about in a moment. So what I need you to gather for colors is a yellow and two types of green, a lighter green and a darker green. And if you only have a darker green and colored pencils, then you could grab a lighter green and crayon. So that's what I mean about mixing and matching depending on what supplies you have. So a yellow, a light green, and a dark green. And then whichever two colors of the same shades that you want to do the flower itself. So what I mean by that is I'm going to do a traditional stargazer lily. So I'm going to use a light pink and a dark pink for my petals. But you might decide that you want your stargazer lily to be blue or purple or any color that you can imagine, but you need two different shades of that color, a darker version and a lighter version, just like a light version of the green and a dark version of green. So make sure that you have two for the petals, two for the leaves and stems, and then one yellow in addition to that. Hopefully that makes sense. So go ahead and pause. You'll also need an eraser, by the way. I know colored pencil isn't very easy to erase, but just in case you need to, we have it on hand and we can do our best with that. So go ahead and pause if you need to go and collect different supplies, and come on back when you are ready to add color to this Mother's Day lily. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to start with the yellow, and we're going to work our way from the center out, just like we've been doing in our flower series, because that's how a flower grows, is from the center out. And we're just going to start by adding yellow to the very, very center. And then I mentioned last week that we are going to be doing a lot of color blending because there's a beautiful gradient of color in a flower. So we're going to start by just adding some of that yellow in this kind of radial direction, which means moving from the center out like the radius of a circle, if you've learned that yet. So moving from the center out in this kind of radial or circular way. And you'll see that I'm not coloring everything in. I'm not shading everything in the center yellow. I'm moving from the center out kind of in this like wispy way. The only thing I want to make sure is that the very center is yellow, and I'm not coloring these little stems that go out to the pollen sites. I'm not coloring those yellow. I'm coloring around those. If you did already color them yellow, it's a very light color. You can try to erase it. No big deal, because we're going to cover over that in a darker color so you won't actually see it. So that's what I'm going to do for the yellow. And then I'm going to move on and I'm going to choose the lighter color for whatever my petals are going to be. So again, I'm choosing this pink kind of variety. So I'm going to choose my lighter color of pink, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start shading in all of my petals. Now, I'm going to move to fast mode in a second here, but I want to show you just kind of the method that I'm going to go forward using. So I'm going to color in all of my petals using this lighter shade of my whatever chosen color you have. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to do that on all the rest of my petals here. And then once I have all of those colored, then I'm going to move on and I'm going to choose the darker color that I have for my petal. And I'm going to kind of use this as a highlighter. So I'm going to show this kind of direction of my petal by coloring the center of it darker and then shading from that center out, shading from the center back out, coloring over that yellow. And it's very subtle. It's kind of just this darker right down the center point of the petal, and then it kind of moves in that same way, flaring out from the center towards the edges of the petal. And I'm going to do that on all of my petals, right? So the same thing over here. This is after you've colored all the petals the lighter color that you've chosen. And I move from that center line out, and I kind of flare that all the way into my yellow, moving in that out direction from the center line and out, almost like a feather. Okay, it has the same kind of patterning. If you've ever looked at a feather, these petals are getting a feather coloring in method. Okay, so I'm gonna pause here because I'm gonna move into fast mode in a second, and then you'll see how it's all gonna look. But the next thing you're gonna do while you have this darker shade of the color you chose is you're gonna add in those beautiful spots that are what make the stargazer lily so special. And they're little, they're not very big. And you're just gonna go right in this darker area that you feathered, and you're gonna work your way kind of out along those darker areas. And you're not gonna fill in all the way into the lighter zone. You're gonna keep those spots close in where the darker feathering is, because that's how they grow. Those spots show up around that darker feathering area in that same color scheme as the darker color you chose. And they don't really show up in the lighter pink area. So that's all we're gonna do with that. Again, in fast mode, you'll see how I kind of fill that all in just that way. Then I'm gonna move into using my lighter green color. So remember, we always go light first and then we layer with the darker colors. I mentioned in the last video or the one before that you can never take away the darkness, but you can always add more darkness. So you always wanna go light to dark. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna show you how we're gonna do one of these bulbs. So I'm going first with my lighter color of green, all the way up, shading the whole entire thing in. And then once I do that, I'm gonna color darker along the stem of the bulb, just to give it that gradient of color. And from here, I'm gonna show the same thing, this darker growth up my bulb, all the way up to the top here. And I'm gonna do one of them. And then just for some dimensions, I'm gonna do one more, just kind of growing all the way up. Notice that they grow up to the tip. And at the tip, it's gonna be a little bit darker also. The next time you have a chance to look at some buds that are about to grow and open and blossom, you'll notice that there's a darker color at the tip and then this kind of darker growth along where those petals are gonna start to open up, okay? And then that same feathering technique, we can add a little bit of that here. So you're using that all over your flower. And a little bit darker here and back down towards the stem. So that's how that's gonna look. That's how that's gonna look. I'm gonna do the same kind of thing over with my leaves, all the same way with my stem and leaves. And then before I move to fast mode, I'm also gonna color these center stems that grow out from the middle with some green, this darker green. And then I'm going to be using the darker color of my petal to show the shading of the pollen. So I'm gonna color that in nice and dark, those little pollen sites. Just like that. And all the way around. Now, if you want to get fancy, you can put a little bit of that lighter color that you're using for the petals to layer it in to fill up some of the spaces. In the same way that you could take the lighter green and fill up some of the spaces on those little petal stems, okay? And so that's all that we're gonna do. Just a few details before I move to fast mode. I like to then kind of look at what I'm doing here and layer in a couple more colors, again, to highlight. So maybe showing off that green, that light green into yellow. And that's where that gradient of color, that color blending can come into play. All right, so I'm gonna move into fast mode. You're gonna see how the flower kind of takes shape as we add color. And I can't wait to see your finished masterpiece. And I can't wait to hear what your mom or your auntie or your favorite woman in your life says when you give her this beautiful flower that you created. Enjoy.